in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country. Never be a socialist country.
A socialist country.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unpopular Front Dispatches for the Left and Loud. My name is Ben Yudishin. Today, we have a special guest, Jonathan Daniel Brown from Struggle Session. Thanks for coming on. Jonathan, we had a nice chat talking about a lot of my main favorite topics to talk about. Talking a little bit about, the left-liberal divide, like it always comes up. Sorry if it's a broken record. Also talking about video games, the economics of them and how that's changed, people's relationship to these games. Also a lot about the history of the Kibbutzim, meaning the Kibbutz movement in Israel and the problems with it, which might be obvious to some, but also some of the possibilities that were built into it due to the context and the people who were founding it in the first place. Really great conversation. Just want to give a shout out to our president for shouting out socialism in the State of the Union. So now I have something to remix and make sound dumb. So that's pretty nice. So here we go with our conversation with Jonathan Daniel Brown from Struggle Session. Everybody, thanks for listening. This is Unpopular Front. I'm Ben Yudishin, the person who's always on the show. A person who is not always on the show, that is our special guest today, is Jonathan Daniel Brown from Struggle Session.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate. Thanks so much, Ben. It's a pleasure. It's nice to be thought of.
Absolutely.
I listened to a couple of episodes, and I think
thanks, bud.
You got a great interview style, man.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate it. I've been listening to podcasts for 15 years, so I thought I might as well take what was a teenage hobby and turn it into a hobby in my 30s. So there you go.
That's all anyone can ask for as an American at this point, right?
Right, exactly. To be what I wanted to be when I was 17. Absolutely.
That's all I'm pretty sure I constantly revert back to 17-year-old JB, like, I don't know, 3 times a day. So
exactly.
I get it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, totally. Actually, yeah. I mean, I'm a nanny, so I revert back to my 2-year-old sense. So I definitely understand the inner child thing. But bringing up sort of how I've been into podcasts for a long time, before we get into the heavy, the more I wanted to have you on to talk about sort of like Jewish identity and left politics, but also want to talk about video games because
hell yeah.
The first thing that I listened to podcasts for was video game podcasts. There was I think I had just got an Xbox 360 and for some reason, I just got really into video game culture at that moment. I had played games my entire life, but I don't know if it was just a burgeoning online scene. But I'm just curious, sort of, what's your relationship to gaming culture in your life?
Oh man, where do I even start? The first
I
game.
know that's a big one.
The first game I specifically remember playing is Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Genesis when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. It was my brother Matt's. He's 3 years older than me, and I glomped onto those Genesis games and never really stopped. I was always obsessed with Sonic. I had Sonic the Hedgehog pajamas. I watched the Saturday morning cartoons,
Nice.
both with Jaleel White and the Underground show with like all of the the eco-terrorism Sonic show with the bunny with that's half robotic and the walrus and Princess Sally and shit. I read the comics. I was not a big Mario guy until I entered my teens. Then I became a Mario appreciator because I was fiercely loyal to Sonic and Sega because kids are dumb. But
Right.
But Sonic was always in my veins, and as long as and then I don't know, let's see, maybe when I was like 12 or 13, I got a Dreamcast and I got a PlayStation 2 around that time.
Oh yeah.
And the PlayStation 2 was backwards compatible, so I started playing all of these old PlayStation 1 games. I started getting into the Final Fantasy series. I started downloading Super Nintendo emulators and playing all of these older games that I hadn't
ROMs,
that I missed
man.
out on.
I
was a ROM
loved
guy.
that. I loved when all that like became more available. I kind of feel like for me, maybe it's just because like I didn't get into music until later. To me, ROMs were like the first sort of moment of like, wow, the internet and digital media can like completely repackage huge amounts of history and media and just sort of put it all in your fingertips. And then you just have like a whole different appreciation for the work that's done, but also sort of like the historical context of games, right?
Yeah. ROMs and I'd say mods, like total conversion mods. Like you could get it's actually crazy that modding for old games is still active. Like there was a old Duke Nukem 3D mod I remember playing where you were in Vietnam, and I looked it up recently and it still exists. Brutal Doom, which is a mod of Doom that came out 25, 26 years ago, is still in constant development, is still always being updated. Like what I love about the ROM and mod communities on the internet is that they are so passionate about games, and they are so passionate about games that they'll tinker with them and make them different and better or more interesting, or at least sometimes harder, or sometimes just weird. But the fact that people are passionate enough that they want to dig into the guts of these games and do something different is so cool, and I feel like that's missing from today's gaming world. It's copyright right now. There's too much DRM. There's too much fear of the games as a service model being disrupted because everything has to be connected to the internet. So if I could ask for one thing to happen in the next few years, it's the games as a service model to collapse. I'd like that a lot. I mean, there's a few F2P games like I'll play now and then. Like this Apex Legends game is fun, but as soon as they start squeezing me, I'm out.
Yeah.
I have I'm long past the days of being suckered into throwing $4 into Angry Birds.
Right, exactly. Well, there are two topics there that we could go with, because like I think there's a sort of very beautiful to me, sort of like kind of like anarcho libertarian socialist kind of beauty in the modding community specifically, because it's purely sort of a voluntary choice, and there are these communities and cultures that are built around these certain things, but no one's getting paid for it. It's sort of out of the market.
Right. I think about 5 or 6 years ago, modders started to realize that they could get hired for their modding, maybe a little before that.
That's
and
true.
So a lot of modders are actually like auditioning to get real work, which, I mean, that's not good. That's not what modding should be. But it's true that if someone makes a fucking incredible kick-ass mod, there's going to be someone in the game world who goes like, how do we hire this guy?
Right.
On the flip side, though, it makes it very easy for ego to all of a sudden become like this component of modding. I was reading about Brutal Doom actually, which is a mod I really love, and there's some guy. Let me actually look up his name because his name is on the top of every Brutal Doom like logo. Like he put himself as like his name is the Brutal Doom. Oh, Sergeant Mark IV, right? So Sergeant Mark IV is claims sole credit for Brutal Doom, but there are a lot of people that worked on Brutal Doom that are like, fuck that guy. He's an asshole. He's a racist. He stole work. So the idea that you would steal work for a mod that's already free, I think is so funny to me.
That's hilarious.
There's no, like, this guy's not going to get a job anyway. Like, he's been doing Brutal Doom for 9 years. So, like, the flip side of the ultra commercial mod is Black Mesa for Half-Life 2. And Black Mesa for Half-Life 2 rebuilt the entirety of Half-Life 1 in the Source engine. They've been doing it for like 7 years, and I think 2 or 3 years ago they got straight up acquired by Valve. Like, this is just like an official Half-Life game now. But what's interesting is that even though they got bought, they're still taking forever. So it's not done yet, and won't be done for another probably year. And they're now just working on Valve time instead of modders time.
Yeah, well, you know, it's even slower.
Valve is an exception.
It's even slower.
Yeah, Valve is one of the most interesting, you know, because Valve's a monopoly because of Steam. And because of that, they don't make games really anymore. And it's a shame because they're awesome game developers. On the flip side, everything I've read about Valve is that the people who work there are just comfortable. And the gaming industry is not a comfortable place to work at all.
Exactly.
So there's this ugly thing where it's like, well, does Valve's success mean that the rest of the people in the industry are less comfortable? Or does it mean that Valve has standards that the rest of the gaming industry don't treat the rest of their employees with? And the answer is probably both.
Right. Well, I know Valve takes a lot, like a decent chunk of all the sales that come out of Steam, right? So they're just sitting on
it's just like
cash.
Apple, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So they just sort of they got a monopoly, and they're probably partially the reason why it's so expensive to live in Seattle. Amazon's a bigger reason for that, but you know they're in the area.
I mean, Seattle's you got Starbucks, you've got Amazon, you've got Microsoft, you've got, or I guess they're outside of Seattle, right? They're not in Seattle proper, but
Redmond. But it's all the same. You know, it's all the same metroplex as they.
It's a tech hub. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I've heard that homelessness has gone up. I haven't been to Seattle in 7 years, but
it's that's when I moved here, and it is significantly different. I feel like such like a not quite a gentrifier because I don't make enough money, but like a transplant who's been here for almost a decade. I feel like I'm like one of those people who's like, oh, all these new people in Seattle, they're ruining it. While I was one of those new people too, but there's
it's interesting.
Yeah, but it really has changed, and I think a lot of that is basically just like unrestrained capitalism and just sort of the spread of wealth and growth, but not being done equally. But when you see sort of how like a lot of these companies that are causing these sort of effects in our cities are built on monopolies, either happenstance or on purpose. I don't know if Steam was trying to build a monopoly, but I don't know where else you would buy. Like even when you buy other like PC games, you still have to use Steam, you know, like they got their hooks in you all the time.
I mean, I guess like what's interesting is now that there's the EA and Epic are trying to see if they can dethrone them. I don't know how successful they'll be. Good Old Games has been around for a while, and they're moving into not just old games anymore. Origin has Apex Legends, so a lot of these, the free-to-play market, which I think is very dangerous. I'm actually writing a short film about free-to-play games, but the free-to-play market, what specifically, you know, by taking Las Vegas and Skinner box mechanics that you know have been proliferating the mobile game market for the past 7 years and importing them into the AA and AAA budget world, we're just not going to go back. Games won't go back from that. Like once a mechanic that is just instant generated money becomes completely of the norm, then like that's just going to continue unless there's regulation or there's some kind of crash. And because it's just the money is, look at Grand Theft Auto 5 Online. Grand Theft Auto 5 Online destroyed the Grand Theft Auto franchise's reputation forever. Right. I mean, people do not respect Grand Theft Auto because of what GTA 5 Online did. Rockstar canceled all of their single-player content for the game, all of the expansion packs. People love...
Yeah, which they had done like with the Grand Theft Auto 4 Yeah.
Oh yeah, Ballad of Gay Tony and The Lost and the Damned were incredible, great single player experiences. And
Lost and the Damned was better than the Sons of Anarchy. I stand by it. I mean, Sons of Anarchy is not a really good show, so it's not a huge bar.
Okay, Sons of Anarchy was great until they went to Ireland, and then the whole
that's when I stopped.
Yeah.
That's when I stopped. I felt like this is too many things going on.
I stayed for another couple of seasons, and then like when they set Tig's daughter on fire slowly, I'm like, okay, I don't need to watch this show. There's like a school shooting and a teenager getting set on fire. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like, It was just too much for the sake of it. And like, don't get me wrong, I love I love fake violence. I love it to my core. I deeply, deeply have a respect for gore, for violence. As long as it's not real, I'm happy. If it's real, then I'm like, I get a cut on my knee. I'm like, "Ugh."
Yeah, exactly.
But I love myself some fake violence. But Sons of Anarchy just felt like brutality for the sake of it. The best season was season 2 with Henry Rollins as the Nazi store clerk.
I do remember that one, yes.
Or he wasn't the store clerk. He worked for the Nazi store clerk.
Yeah, was like, there was that other guy who's the actor who is like the big heavy guy, like the heavy that group.
That was like Alan Arkin's kid. That's Adam Arkin. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. I remember that because he's one of the actors who I say looks like my dad. So, that's the only reason I was like, what was the time when my dad, the Jewish lawyer, was a neo-Nazi on Sons of Anarchy? I'm trying to remember.
Well, is Alan Arkin Jewish? Arkin. I don't know.
I don't know. I would assume, but maybe not. I bet I could ask my dad. He probably would know. But, you talk about sort of the games as a service thing. And for a lot of people who might not be very into video games, I guess the easiest way to describe it would just be like sort of economizing games to where you can sort of always have another thing you can buy to sort of make the game a little better or to sort of give you more. But sort of as time's gone on, I feel like it's become more explicitly like a lottery ticket. It's more randomized as opposed to being like I would like to buy this chapter for the game or this gun for the game. Maybe that's just from having followed like the Mass Effect series, for example, or I'm a big fan of like trading card games. So like Hearthstone is like basically the main game that I play. Mm-hmm. But like it makes sense when it's like a digital card game. But
right,
when it's like an action game, that's
where
different.
It gets hinky. Like, yeah, if you go to like a card shop, right, and you're playing Magic the Gathering, and you're like, I don't know what's in this deck, but I'm gonna buy it. I have a hunch. It's not that different than when Hearthstone is selling decks and you don't know what's in the deck. It's weird when you're playing Call of Duty World War II and then like you get an airdrop and it's like spend 50 war coins and the model just does not translate to AAA if it's not free to play. If you're spending $60 on a game and then you have to keep spending money, the game's a scam. Like Rockstar learned that the hard way because look, Red Dead Redemption 2 sold a shitload of copies, but a whole lot of people, as soon as the online launched, they dipped out. RDR2 online will just not be as big because people were defeating missions or were defeating like boss missions and then getting like 10 cents in-game currency. Like the economy was so fucked up that the only way you could actually succeed was to pay to win, and people don't want that, especially in the hardcore gaming world. People who are, look, we call it hardcore gaming and casual gaming, but like to be clear, it's more informed consumers and dupes. Like if you're spending if you're spending thousands of dollars on a free-to-play game, you're getting fucking duped. And when games don't have these boundaries, when developers and publishers turn off any sort of moral license and start getting whales, which again is what the short film I'm making is about. Then you have like essentially a system that depends on like 5% of your customers to grind into dust. And these whales are not like bazillionaires. Like you'd think that like the person who spent $50,000 on the Hearthstone cards in a month would be like somebody who's loaded. That's not the case. These are people who go into debt because their brains are not like working right.
Right.
And so they are like destroying themselves because they're getting the dopamine rush from these games. It is like Las Vegas slot machines, except you can't like with the slot machines. There's at least a tiny chance you could win real money. So,
right. Yeah. You're never going to come out ahead buying, digital, cards.
Right, it just doesn't. Yeah, that doesn't translate into cash. You can't sell those. There's no resale. I actually wonder, like down the line, if they'll have to like figure out a way. Like the idea that like if a card is worth like $2,000 and it's digital, but you can't resell it, like that. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me because, like, again, back to Magic the Gathering and all these old card games. People could actually, sell them to other collectors. Yeah. And if it's all contained on the internet, then there's no value for you. It's just their value. It's just your money and their value. So it's a fucked up thing.
Yeah, totally.
But at the same time, I am curious to see, like, it does feel like there is both pushback from consumers and developers over the last year. My question is how. I mean, part of the problem is game devs don't unionize. So, I mean, there's a push to do it, and it looks like it's gaining traction. But this is going to be a multi-year fight, clearly. Yeah. Like, I mean, as soon as they started game developer, as soon as they started talking about organizing game developers, I realized, like, just by virtue of how remote game developing is, like Ubisoft has a studio in New York or Montreal, and as soon as that closes down, the one in Shanghai opens up to start for the day. It's a 24-hour labor cycle. So
right.
And then I have a lot of friends and loved ones who work in the digital nomad economy. So they don't even go to an office. They all meet their coworkers in Slack rooms. And so it's like, how do you organize? How do you unionize when you don't meet these people, when you don't interact with them on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
So
and all of your conversations are being recorded on the Slack server.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't. Yeah, it's hard to say the boss sucks when the boss is right there. Right. And has access, then can revoke your privileges. So it's with digital labor, organization is going to have to adapt, and I don't know how or what that means, but when you have a company that has no office but still has $10 billion, and there's a lot of them now. You can't just protest in front of a storefront. So I'm fascinated to see how labor organization adapts for these digital circumstances because it's going to need to.
Right. Yeah. Totally. And that kind of makes me think of, from the consumer perspective. Obviously, from like a consumer perspective, we need to probably make sure that we care and we know about who actually makes our games, not just the companies that own them. Mm-hmm. But it also kind of makes me wonder, and maybe this is just my like amateur Marxism, but like I feel like
me. I'm an amateur lefty. Anybody who acts like they're like an expert, unless they're like a professor of economics, like I'm always got. I'm a cynical dude.
Exactly. You don't trust it.
I'm not really like a Kool-Aid drinker. So as soon as someone tells me they have all the ideas, I'm like, I don't know. But
exactly.
I'm open to them. But like, for every Professor Richard D. Wolf and for every Bernie Sanders, there's some idiot yelling at us online, and I just don't care anymore.
With an anime avatar. Not to say all anime avatars are bad, but a lot of the times when those are combined, it becomes a problem.
Well, anime avatar, it's interesting. Like,
actually, can I ask you about the anime avatar thing? Where this is kind of going off of gaming, but
let's do it.
This is a thing that because I was off as I mentioned a lot on the show, at least recently. I wasn't on Twitter very online during 2016, or really like
It's good. It's good you were not there.
I know. A lot of people still are having like PTSD, but so like I kind of got off Twitter in like maybe 2014 because I like met my wife and was like trying to like build a career in like childcare and I don't know.
Actually, like eat and live, and it turns out that
then I got back on though. That's the thing. I still got sucked in. I think it was the 2016 like. After Trump winning is what kind of got me back on,
So I was the wackadoodle who was yelling at everyone I knew that Trump was going to win as soon as Bernie got knocked out of the primary. As soon as that happened, I was like, it's done. It's already over. Like, Hillary has no shot. She will never win. Trump is the president, and it's only March. And I spent 6 months telling people that, and I got a lot of anger for it because nobody really wanted to believe it. Nobody wanted to believe the dude had a shot. And I just knew he had a shot. I knew it in my bones. And you want to know why? Because there were things that, like, my lizard brain, as like a dude who grew up in the suburbs, like, connected to. I didn't agree with them, but like as a white kid from the suburbs, I could relate to certain things he said. And because and a lot of leftists treat this shit like original sin. That if you hear something bad and it connects to you, then you are bad. That's it's Catholic Church bullshit. That's not true. Like. That is looking at politics as a vessel of individual morality. It's not like it takes like singular bad. It's not millions of singular bad people. It's like you can take the smartest people in the world. You take the 10,000 smart people in a room, and they'll all act like they'll devolve into fucking morons. And what Trump did was he seized on the populism of the Bernie campaign, and I watched him do it beautifully. I watched as Paul Manafort talked about breaking up the banks. How did nobody realize what was going on around? I know,
yeah, like,
I don't know.
The bringing up like someone like Paul Manafort is like such a perfect example of how duped we were, but also how open the space was. That someone who was like behind. Basically, like the shift towards a certain kind of like bullshit corporate consultation, industrial complex in the 80s is the one who's saying break up the banks. Is like the only one saying that. Like that's a bizarre moment to be in. Yeah,
I mean, like anybody with a brain who has a history of, or rather, not anyone with a brain, because the truth is that America does not have class conscience. America is not a class-conscious society, and there are a lot of really smart people who are really fucking dumb when it comes to this stuff. But it's this idea that liberals, from what I've noticed, specifically center-right Democrats, tend to look at populism as one thing. Like left populism, right populism, it's all the same. Stalin, Hitler, blah, 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 blah. It's a really simplistic and shitty way to view the world. It makes no sense. It's something that, as a leftist, sometimes I deal with that where, like, I will, like, meet somebody who is like, Stalin is good, and I'll be like, shut the fuck up, man.
Yeah,
like,
come on,
it's
guys.
just not it's just not true. Like, my Jewish ass knows that's not true. And like, shut the fuck up. Like,
exactly.
So I don't have a patience for tankies anymore. I think a couple of years ago when I started Struggle Session, I was like open to hearing out like more hard left authoritarian views, and just because nothing else the system isn't working. I'll hear any crazy shit. And like, but over the past couple of years, I've really mellowed out and I've realized like, no, the truth is that like I am slightly left of Bernie Sanders. I'm not this revolutionary I thought I was a few years ago. I'm a kid. Yeah. I'm an idiot. I'm turning 30 next year. And like, I am, if being a social democratic socialist isn't enough for chunks of the internet, then like, I don't give a shit because I don't want to die with the planet melting, and that's my priority.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah. I'm actually really glad that you said that, because I was actually going to, like, for the opening for the show, I was gonna talk about this clip that was going around where a bunch of people who I didn't really think are quote tankies, basically like weird online Marxist-Leninist people. Not all Marxist-Leninists are like this. Okay.
No, full disclosure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've gone over this before in the show. So if someone wants to attack JDB, just attack me. It's really fine.
Well, I'm not on. Part of the joy of not being on Twitter or not having a personal account on Twitter, is that people stop hating you when you stop posting under your name. It's fascinating. It's an amazing thing to see that. There you go. You just kind of get forgotten by Twitter when you're gone. Like you get like sort of like, I mean, the deplatforming is like a weird kind of unpersoning. I did get myself kicked off of Twitter, by the way. I trolled a whole lot of Hillary supporters. I don't regret it, but I do think it's funny that there are a lot of people who are now using. Part of the reason why I don't believe in deplatforming, and I am kind of like a free speech guy, is I do feel like, well, look, we live under a right-wing government. We live under right-wing power. Why would you want to leverage right-wing tech companies to have more power over your life? That doesn't make sense to me. Right. I do not trust Facebook. I do not trust Twitter. I do not trust Amazon. why would leftists willingly give them more power to punish our enemies, knowing full well that that's going to come back to bite us? For every Alex Jones you take down, that's like another leftist that's going to get banned in a year or two. But anyway, I'm swimming against the tide on this one. The crowds thoroughly disagree with me on this one. But what can I do?
It's I'm sort of agnostic on this, mainly just because I'm with you on a lot of that, and I just like the only response I have to that is that I guess it's like people feel so powerless. This is like the only way they can exert their power. But that's not a reason to give people whose interests are against ours power, though. So
right, but
I think
my whole thing is like, instead of fighting to deplatform right wingers, fight to break up the tech companies. These companies are too big. They have too much power over our lives. They
have a
spy
monopoly
on us. They get us to fight each other. Like they're surveillance companies. Like, what are you talking? Stop using them to get your enemies fired from their jobs and start dismantling them. But whatever. What can I do? I'm swimming against the tide.
Why don't you just make your own Twitter? Which that's
Mastodon. Are you on Mastodon? I know that.
No, come on. I can barely be on Twitter and Facebook at the same time without having like a mental breakdown. I don't know how people can be on more than two social networks.
So I switched to Instagram, and I was like, Instagram is nice, even though it's owned by Facebook. It's just pictures, so I don't feel the pressure. And then you know what fucking happened? The founders of Instagram got kicked out. Zuckerberg took over, and now everyone has to do text posts. So like, you have to post a picture with text in the picture, and then you have to write text. Otherwise, you get zero engagement. So you just cannot win with these people. And if we keep playing their game, they will get richer and richer, and our brains will continue to turn into jelly. So, By next year, when Zuckerberg fully integrates Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook, I'm just going to be a social media free guy. And that scares me, because I've been on social media for, 17 years.
Right, yeah. I
had MySpace when I was 13.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah, I think I've been on social media for about the same amount of time. I think I had a band in high school. I think I made a MySpace account before the band even practiced. You know, it was a big deal back in the day. Before we go, I really wanted to talk about Israel and Judaism.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because, it's a thing I've been thinking a lot about, with the likelihood of Bernie Sanders running, and also just like a personal thing of like me and my family are like finally doing some like genealogy stuff, kind of trying to figure out, because like no one really knew the origin of my last name, or really like on my dad's side.
Are you Sephardic by any
chance?
No,
I'm Ashkenazi. It's Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, Jews. That area. Maybe some parts of Russia. So
yeah, so my family is entirely Russian and Polish, and then like with a weird like dollop of Canadian.
There you go. Why not?
But it's it's always frustrated me, the discourse involving Jews on the left, and not because criticism of Israel is wrong, but more like modern trends of intersectionality tend to erase biracial people. They tend to erase model minorities, people who like don't fit into these narratives. And as a Jewish guy, I know that like, look, I'm a white dude, and I get the privileges of being white or whatever. But at the same time, like historically, like, look, I mean, I spent a year at a boarding school in Utah where I was called a Christ killer all the time by a bunch of Mormon shitheads. Like,
oh my God.
I know that like it is not the same. Like, I know that Jewish American history is not the same as like, say, puritanical. Like, I think it's a not a fair view of American history to lump. I think part of the problem with how we talk about whiteness is that we like are like, what about Irish people? What about Italian people? What about Jewish people? By erasing people's identities and telling them that they are white and that's that, it makes them easier to recruit by the GOP. Again, like I'm not trying to like protect white feelings or anything. I'm just trying to say that like to lump all part of that is what whiteness is. That's why white supremacists are so despicable, is because they call themselves like white and white only. Like, well, what? That's bullshit. Like, one of you is Irish, one of you is Italian, one of you is from Finland. Like, you get you know, it's the anti-immigrant narrative that white supremacists always create. It's so disgusting, but it also erases their own histories as so they can be pure. It's so when I hear like people on the left go like, well, all Ashkenazi Jews are white and like that's that, it's like, okay, sure, but like,
right. Well, and you know, totally. And a thing that I wonder about this is a book I always plug whenever the concept of like whiteness comes up, is Racecraft by Barbara and Karen Fields. They really go into the construction of whiteness and blackness in American history from like a very Marxist perspective. It's so good. It's short, highly recommended. But like this idea of just sort of totalizing all of these groups into just being white people is really insidious and plays into that sort of white supremacist nature, because I think part of it is it sort of takes away a chance to build solidarity between historical struggles. And
Bingo.
Maybe that's the idea, right? Like that if we want to sort of like, you know, like on the other side of my family, it's like, you know, like white, poor, Catholic Germans and Irish Catholics who came over, you know, a few generations before my dad's side, which were Jews. But like on that side, they came to America and were basically with the promise of like white supremacy and like domination of the land and certain classes of people, maybe not owning slaves, but it's built into that. But part of that is they have to discard their heritage and their history. And I think that's what happens a lot, is we discard that heritage, and instead of seeing like a commonality, it just becomes a distance, right?
Well, look, I mean, in the last 10 years, the entire attitude, or even 15 years, the entire American attitude on what integration means has rapidly changed because of the internet. I mean, look, Ellis Island and all of these processing centers were considered, you know, the most humane immigration centers in the world. Now we look and go like, oh my God, it's a horror show. We like shaved everyone's heads and made
gave them
change
the wrong
their
names. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we made everyone change their names.
That's what mine is.
We said learn English or get the. Yeah, my last name's Brown. You think that's what it was in Poland and Russia?
Exactly.
It was Kazyanska. It was Rosenzweig. Like, I mean, like, but we were essentially the trade off of immigration is like you take the American identity, you take the American language, which is English, just so you know, and then you adapt and you assimilate, and that has rapidly changed. And so that's why here's what's fascinating to me is like a lot of anti-immigration sentiment often comes from not just what do you call them, isolationists, but also people who did it quote unquote the right way. Like you see a lot of anti-immigration from like right-wing Cuban and Hispanic groups because of that, and that's because they put up with so much fucking shit, and now they're seeing that the next generation doesn't have to put up with shit,
right?
And
yeah, they don't have the benefit of the Cold War going on to sort of encourage a certain kind of immigration.
And that the Cold War is 99% of it. Yeah. And it really is like so much of God, I mean, like we see our parents as like normal functional people, but as little children they hid under their desks in case nukes went off. Like we have generations and generations of trauma and PTSD to sift through. Our parents are traumatized. Our grandparents are traumatized. Trauma creates fucked up views of the world, straight up. Yeah. And I believe that the Democrats have taken advantage of this and have used it not to promote cross-racial solidarity, and that's a shame because that is the best way to defeat fascist and right-wing and white supremacist coalitions, is to get a shitload of people who have nothing in common and get them all together and fight out the bad guys. Like these are, if you can get, I think Bernie Sanders, I'm hoping, and Ocasio-Cortez as well, they shift the conversation on modern democratic identity politics, because right now it's a wokeness contest. It's not a contest. It's not about bringing people from different backgrounds together to defeat a fucked up system that threatens to destroy the planet.
Right.
Like at this point, the stakes are too high. Like we got 11 years left until the climate change catastrophe kicks in and will be irreversible. We've got an economy that's clearly teetering off a cliff where more and more and more wealth is just being sucked up by the top 0.1%. We've got in the next 10, 20 years, all of the boomers are gonna fucking retire, and you're gonna have all these retired bazillionaires, or people who have houses that are worth a lot more money. Like in the case of my bottom 1% parents, like you buy a house in the 90s that's $300,000, and that's like a top 10% thing in the suburbs. And then all of a sudden that same house costs over $1 million, and then you're too scared to sell it because where else are you gonna go? Do you just live in that house till you die?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, but then in that case, the next generation, there are families, they'll have kids, they don't get that house that the generation previous got. And so as we're living longer, but at the same time, quality of life is not going up. So it's a scary thing, especially for. I mean, look, how old are you, Ben?
I'm 31.
Okay, cool. I'm 29. So we are children of the era of George W. Bush.
Oh, hell yeah.
We have been fucked more than any other generation in American history since the Depression. As soon as I got out of
Hear
high
that,
school,
Grandma? Hear that, Grandma?
Yeah, take that, bubby. No.
Yeah.
No, we as soon as we got out of high school and got out of college, the economy tanked. The recovery happened, but it only really benefited the people that were already in the economy before us. So, and even that recovery is a fraction of, frankly, the quote-unquote good old days of the strong middle class.
Right.
But now, as millennials are getting older and older, we're going to have millennials in their 40s who are in the same one-bedroom apartments they lived in when they were, right out of college. And so this lack of upward mobility is creating, it's creating generational anger, and it's creating, it's going to strain the system further. But I will say that that nobody has done more to move this country left in the last month or two than Howard Schultz.
I know, right? Another,
keep it up, dude.
Exactly. He's a, I've talked a lot about him on this show and on another friend's show, and he's really good for us, actually. I mean, unless he actually runs, but I feel like he is so bad he actually couldn't be a spoiler. That's how bad of a politician he is,
He's like Steve Forbes. He's a radicalizing force. Steve Forbes ran for the presidency in the 90s. So another guy, Ross Perot, did. Like, these guys never had the power to actually move this. I mean, it's so funny. These third-party candidates never actually fix an election. The idea that Jill Stein or fucking what's his name, Stoner Aleppo, Gary Johnson.
What is Aleppo?
And what is Aleppo?
You're kidding.
No.
Aleppo is in Syria. It's the epicenter of the refugee crisis.
Okay, got it.
Well, yeah, the idea that either of these guys move the needle is a farce. But I like Jill a little bit in terms of the fact that she talked a lot of shit. But whatever. I did not. I wrote in Bernie. Who gives a crap? It doesn't matter.
You're in California.
I'm in California. Yeah. Like I could have voted for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Yeah. Okay, but I ended up going off topic again. So let's dive into Israel. I've been to Israel twice, just an FYI. I have.
Yeah,
I was raised. I was raised in a pretty Zionist household. We always believed in the two-state solution. We always believed in a secular Israeli government that worked with a secular Palestinian government. We also believed in like a shared Jerusalem. At the same time, here's what happened. The Intifada fucked up all of the American Jews on the West Coast up. I live in LA, which has a massive, massive Israeli expat population. These Israelis feel bad. They feel like because Israel is such a nationalistic country where you all have to join the army when you turn 18, and where Israel is a part – any country where nationalism and patriotism takes such a core part of your identity, when you leave that country, it fucks you up. That's why American expats deal with it too. Like, there is an anxiety of not being quote unquote home. Of course, there's an irony with that given the history of how Israel was created and whatnot, but I digress. Israel has California has a massive Israeli population. the American Jewish population is shifting slowly but surely more against the interests of the Netanyahu government. Now, most American Jewish Zionists who are liberals that I know are very sympathetic to Palestinian issues, but they do tend to fall for like AIPAC party lines. And the problem with that is that AIPAC has such a strong influence in Jewish community life that resistance to Israeli government aggression is usually met with not accusations of anti-Semitism anymore. That was more like during the Intifada, and it's still a thing, especially for like, frankly, Muslim and Arab and brown critics, black critics.
Exactly.
But Jewish critics get called self-hating Jews, which I really don't like at all, and that bothers me a lot. The thing about Israel is that Israel has a mostly secular population. It's just that the current voting bloc that keeps Netanyahu's government up is right-wing fundamentalists and settlers. Right. And so Netanyahu requires these crazies or else he's doomed. And has whenever I argue about this with anybody, because I know a lot of people who are critical of Netanyahu, but don't want they would never call them. It's very hard to find an anti-Zionist in a Jewish community in LA. Let me tell you, it's just this was part of the thing I was talking about when the DSA endorsed BDS. And then the DSA-LA tried to go to all these synagogues and the synagogue for like a program, and the synagogues told them to fuck off. And I'm like, well, I could have told you that would have happened, but whatever. Like the Jewish community is too entrenched with the lobby, but is slowly pulling away. And a big part of that is Netanyahu. Netanyahu is so unappealing to American Jews. He is the Israeli Erdogan. He is to Israel what Erdogan is to Turkey, and it's giving a wake-up call to American Jews who have supported Israel without any strings attached for the last 50 years.
Yeah. It's interesting. Israel and Turkey both have a very similar sort of post-World War II relationship with the United States being kind of bulwarks against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, they're client states. They're anti-Soviet client states.
Yes.
And what's happened is that both countries are slipping deeper and deeper into fundamentalism. Erdogan is pushing, more Islam. Netanyahu is pushing more and more hardcore Orthodox Judaism and nationalism. Mm-hmm. The populations of both countries continue to suffer. The Palestinians continue to suffer, and then young Israeli kids, because they join the military when they're 18, are essentially peppered with propaganda from birth. And so it's a really fucked up problem because. Look, I mean, obviously, in a socialist utopia, you want one state. You don't want two opposing states. You don't want two states with different religions that are constantly killing each other. You need some sort of international thing. It didn't work in the 40s. That was the original UN pitch.
Yeah.
And of course, the Palestinians will argue that, well, look, the Israelis did a land grab, and they're not wrong. Israelis will argue, well, you had like a shitload of refugees from all over the world that had just survived mass extermination. Where are you going to put them? It's the same, Yeah. So there is, I think that it's a lot more complicated than the modern left speaks about Israel. But I do think that the Israeli government in its current state is as disgusting as it gets. I do think that there were people that tried in the Israeli government. And this is where I want to spin into the kibbutzim. Yeah, Israeli culture historically for 110 years was Zionism, as created by Theodor Herzl, was a socialist ideology, and I think there are a lot of people on the left who are embarrassed about that and don't want to acknowledge it, but it's a fact. Labor Zionism was this idea that you take a bunch of Jews, it's Palestinians will call it settler colonialism, and it's not wrong, but you take a bunch of Jews, you put them in a place, and then you let them live off the land. It's a communal form of living, and that's what the kibbutzim were. There were a few mixed race kibbutzim, and there's a couple of left still, but they just don't do that well. No. Essentially, for 50 years, the kibbutzim were fairly functional, but and you had people living together, you had them sharing space, you had them raising crops and animals together, it was a cooperative form of living that was separate from a capitalist system. I mean, look, one of the main mottos of the kibbutzim movement was for each according to his needs. So like Marxism is built into Israel's birth. And there are a lot of leftists that just don't want to admit that. And maybe because Israel right now is so right-wing and nationalistic, and frankly probably has been for 30 years.
Yeah.
And look, you see these – when I went to Israel last time about 10 years ago, I went to one of these mixed race kibbutzim that was with Israeli and Palestinians. And around that time, Operation Cast Lead had happened. Ariel Sharon had dropped a shitload of bombs in Gaza, and everyone there was horrified. They were all saying, we are disgusted with the Israeli government. We are ashamed of the Israeli government. We're trying to do something different. But what happened is that in the late 80s and the 90s, the kibbutzim land got bought out. The land got bought. Money came in. They took the land, and that was that. Capital. The reason why the kibbutzim system failed was because Israel is too tied into our global capitalist economy for them to have these little socialist villages.
Right.
It doesn't make sense when they are they are clients of our weapons. They are clients of our equipment. They work with us in tech and agriculture. We do business with them on occupied lands like SodaStream on the West Bank. The kibbutzim movement could never survive. There's too much money at stake.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
There's a great article from the Forward from about 9 years ago called "What Actually Undermined the Kibbutz," and Jewish Forward's kind of lazy lately, but they've been around for 100 years, so I'm not going to toss them just yet.
Exactly.
But here's what it says: the way they tell it. This is written by a guy named J.J. Goldberg. The way they tell it. Let's see. The kibbutzim that maintain classic kibbutz socialisms are the ones that thrived economically over the past generation. Oh, so this is interesting. So even though most of the kibbutzes that died, the ones that didn't sell out are still doing okay. The kibbutzim that maintain classic kibbutz socialism are the ones that thrived economically over the past generation. Their members have kept innovating regardless of kibbutz structure, developing and marketing high-tech irrigation systems, operating state-of-the-art printing, plastics, manufacturing, even financial services. It turns out that when money comes in, no one minds caring. It's when the kibbutz treasury runs dry and living standards are slashed that bickering erupts. Yeah. So what he's saying, I guess in the 80s, the Israeli economy collapsed, and that's when, banks came in and debt started getting restructured, and the whole system became more of this global economic capitalist thing that we're all now stuck in.
Yeah.
But the socialist idealism was essentially replaced by private incentive, and that's the problem, and that's why that's why these cloistered communities in capitalist societies never truly work. I mean, that's why anytime you hear about a group of Americans who go and live off the land and start their own mini society, it'll either turn into a cult or it'll fall apart. It's just because the system that we're actually in hasn't changed. And capitalism isn't opt out, and it will come for you.
Right. Yeah. We can't just do these little micro tweaks in our small communities without being, it's like the gravitational pull of the system that is global capitalism is so much larger than any of these little tiny communities. How can you fight it? You need more. You need a broad social movement.
Right, you do. But that doesn't mean that these kibbutzim never worked. And that doesn't mean that idealism is naive and that greed is good. It means that you have to look at the bigger system, and whether it's the banks that finance both Israeli settlements and Palestinian developments at the same time,
right,
or the nationalist governments that want to prevent people from living without their power. It is a fundamental – the Israeli narrative has been a fundamental one from the perspective of Israelis escaping genocide. But the downside, of course, being is that all of this was so many people were displaced, so many people's lands were taken, and so much has been done to fuck those people and not make it right for them that we're just going to be in this state of perpetual, or not we, but they're just going to be in this state of perpetual war. And the Palestinian cause – is constantly being undermined by, both capitalist forces and, of course, internal fighting. You have two factions that just do not get along. Fatah is more secular and nationalistic. Hamas is Islamist. They do not have consistent ideologies.
No.
And because of that, they're constantly at each other's throats and constantly they are a problem for peace in the region as well, obviously. So do I think that what Israel is doing in Palestine is disgusting? Yeah, I want them out. I want them out of the occupied territories. I want them out of Gaza. I want them out of the West Bank. The Palestinians deserve their right to self-determination, and the Israelis can't keep profiting off of these people at their expense, straight up. But that means that Israel has to, if it wants to survive long term and not be destroyed, it has to look at its role in the military-industrial complex.
Exactly.
And it has to get rid of these nationalist wackos like Netanyahu.
Yes.
Because even a liberal like Yitzhak Rabin would be, because a liberal in Israel, that's like an UK liberal. That's
exactly.
still left of any American liberal. But even a liberal like Yitzhak Rabin, who was shot by a right-wing nationalist Israeli, mind you, had interest in bridging the divide, and it just seems like right now the peace. It's just so funny that I remember a year or two ago, Trump was crowing that Kushner was going to end this fight, and then a few years ago Obama was claiming that he was going to end this fight. Like, this is a fight that it's almost as if our interference makes it worse.
Right.
But
yeah, with America comes a lot of strings to attach and capital interests who are snooping around with you sort of at all times.
Right.
I'm curious. This might be okay. This might be a really stupid question, but I didn't really get very intense Jewish education. My family was, mixed faith backgrounds, and I went to like a Unitarian church, which is basically, it's like you just get to pick whatever the fuck you want, and they were all just like liberals who listen to NPR. And
that sounds kind of like fun church, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not really a church guy.
No, I wasn't into it either. The second I didn't have to go anymore, I stopped going. But the one thing I've always wondered with the settlement of Israel and the historical context is obviously there's the biblical and sort of proto-history connection to this land, but
which is funny because the most religious Jews, who are, by the way, they don't pay taxes, the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredis in Israel, they don't pay taxes and they don't have to join the military. They benefit from the military, but they also don't believe that Israel is a real country either because the Messiah didn't deliver to them. Sorry, I just wanted to...
No. That's another... There are all these tiny wrinkles, right? And they all have slightly different interpretations. And I guess like what I was just curious about was sort of in that post-1945 time, and when there were the influx of refugees going to a place like Israel, specifically to Israel, kind of why have it be that land? Why not have it in, I don't know, Poland, considering the...
Well, that's that's the big mistake. Did you ever read that book, The Yiddish Policemen's Union by Michael Chabon?
I've heard of that.
Just in Alaska.
Yeah, totally though, right? It's funny, and it probably would not have worked out well. But wasn't there a period of time when our number one favorite socialist ever, Joseph Stalin? No, he's terrible. Don't. Come on, people. I'm with Chomsky on Stalin. He calls him a right-wing deviation. So yep. I'm sticking with that. But even he, that very anti-Semitic guy, wanted to send Jews to southern Mongolia or northern Mongolia and have a land in the eastern steppe that could be a land for Jews.
There are a million plans.
Exactly.
There are a million plans with what to do with the Jewish refugees. Do you give them Germany? Do you send them to Siberia? Do you give them Alaska?
Right.
Do you move them to Africa? Do something like Liberia with freed slaves that were just shipped back to Africa and told to start another country, even though they were Americans at that point?
Which is oh man.
That's fucked up. That's a whole. Historically, Americans are bad at refugee resettlement. Let's just say that we're not good at that.
Yeah, we're not super great at integrating them into our society, but we're way better at that than just sending them to another place.
Yeah, we're not good at this stuff. I mean, look when the war on terror ends, what the fuck are we going to do with all these people in Guantanamo? Like I mean, it should have been sent home years ago.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Now like what, how are they going to, they're not going to be able to fit it. Like we fucked up. We fucked up and we'll continue to fuck up.
We're going to make an artificial island out of trash off the coast of Florida, and that's where they're going to get to live.
You know, that sounds like a great Peter Thiel idea, dude.
Yeah. I've always thought
e-cigarette world. Just take all the old e-cigarettes, create an island.
Exactly. all the old batteries for vapes that like don't work because they have like the really shitty batteries. I actually always thought that someone should make a movie about that weird Peter Thiel thing where he was going to make like a little, kind of basically like a combination of BioShock and Metal Gear Solid 2, right? Like he was going to like have big shell, but it's going to be like a libertarian utopia. But I always thought that someone should do like a comedy where like it's like that, but it's also like pirates come in, like Captain Phillips style.
You should don't give that up. Start writing that.
Okay,
I don't know if you're right, but that sounds funny. I'd read
good
it.
enough. I only write op-eds to send to my dad, and I post them on Medium. But yeah.
I text them to my father.
There you go. All right. There you go. Well, JDB, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Oh, thank you so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure. Anytime you want to chat, just hit me up.
Yeah, totally. And just say to the other struggle session guys, never log off. They're definitely two of my favorite tweeters because they are so goddamn confrontational. It's impressive.
Jack and Leslie, they are the kings. They are the kings of the internet. I do not have the stomach.
Me neither.
I do not have the stomach. But they are the kings.
They just do not give a shit, and I think it's very cool, and especially for Jack for getting involved in that whole Louis C.K. set thing. That I was like, yeah. Like when I saw that, I was like, yeah, I know that guy. I've given that guy Patreon money. Yeah.
Well, thank you for
I was
supporting
proud of all you guys.
We'll have to support you as well. I mean, that's the least we can do.
Well, and my Patreon is sort of inactive right now. I don't feel like I put out enough content to justify it, but I'm gonna do it eventually.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, do it. Get paid.
Fair enough.
Oh man.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Yeah,
this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you said you're working on a short film about whales, so I'm sure I will. Yeah, well, so
I have a short film coming. Well, the script is almost done. My last short film was called Horseshoe Theory. It was a romantic comedy about a white supremacist and a member of the Islamic State. and then I like to make fucked up dark comedies. And then after that, let's see, we got Struggle Session where we're growing. We got very lucky. We broke 1,000 last month, and that's been very exciting for us because Jack and Leslie and I we like eating, and that's good.
Exactly.
One of the more frustrating things about the deep irony, which I feel like a lot of people in the lefty podcast space don't really want to talk about, is like, since you can't opt out of capitalism, and sometimes I feel like well, I'm like a Che shirt or something, because here I am like charging for content about how money sucks. But on the other hand, it's like that's how the contradiction of the system gets you to lower your own value by constantly feeling like shit.
Right. Exactly.
I'm just trying to take it a day at a time, and see how. I'm really glad people still love the show, and we hope to be doing this for a long, long time.
Yes, I hope so as well. I hope all of these shows stay around, and I love all the community, and there's a lot of really good stuff out there. So listen to it and support people. That's a good thing.
That's very kind of you.
Yes.
And let's do this again soon. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Talk to you later.
Later.
Right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you to Jonathan Daniel Brown for coming on Unpopular Front. You can subscribe to Unpopular Front on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Go to unpopularfront.com for links to articles, episodes, ways to subscribe, ways to reach me, and more. I appreciate all the love and support, and thanks a lot. Bye-bye.